Hey folks, so I've just come off an interesting debate on the group British Muslims for Secular Democracy, which was quoting the actor, comedian Stephen Fry on saying that God, in his view, God is monstrous. Actually, I'll find the exact quotation here. Yes, Stephen Fry's furious rant about God. He is utterly monstrous, selfish, and deserves no respect. Okay, well, it's well known that Stephen Fry is an atheist, and that's fine. I don't want to speak so much specifically about Stephen Fry, but a debate followed, and some atheists were coming out with sort of posts about their views on religion. So what I want to do in this video is talk a little bit about my stance on atheism as a belief system, but also what I think about some hardline atheists. I'm not talking specifically about Mr. Fry. Most of this video is talking in generic terms, so I need to emphasize that. Generic in the sense of I'm not talking about individuals. Okay, so I've made a lot of videos on religious extremism, especially Islamism, and I do believe that it poses a very grave problem for the world. I do think that there can be found many problems within Islam. We see Islamism. We see the evidence of it every single day in bloody massacres all over the world. That's not an exaggeration. It really is happening right now, and I stand by my view that this is comparable, perhaps not in scale, but certainly in its international scope, to communism and fascism in the 30s. In the 2000s and 2010s, it is Islamism. There is also a dark side to Christianity. We see certain regressive attitudes, especially in parts of Africa, for example, towards homosexuals, and the church has a large part to play in that perception, and for, I believe, influencing people's views. The church also has a lot to answer for, especially the Catholic Church, in terms of sexual abuse scandals, and also in terms of their record on their attitude to AIDS, for example, and a wide range of other things. So all of those things I think it's completely legitimate to criticise religion for. Religion has a hell of a lot to answer for in terms of human rights abuses, in terms of repressive attitudes. Okay, I'm fine with that. I think all of those things are free target. I think that's very legitimate to bring up any of those issues. But that's not what I have a problem with. What I have a problem with from some atheists, actually before I continue I should really emphasize my own perspective. I don't regard myself as particularly religious in that I don't follow organized religion. But nor do I consider myself an outright atheist, because the atheist position is that you don't believe in a deity. I am much more comfortable with the agnostic position in that I simply don't know that there is a God or not. Certainly scientific evidence would suggest there's no God, and I do think that we need to respect science, but science is constantly developing, it's constantly pioneering new things. So just because there's been no evidence so far that there is a deity, and probably there's not, that's my instinct, probably there's not, but I don't have a problem with those who argue that just because you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I think that's a fair point. We can't visually see gravity, but we know it exists. So another thing that personally I'm uncomfortable with atheism, and this is not against any atheists, this is just my own position. I feel a little uncomfortable with the fact that when we die we just rot away and that's it. So yeah, maybe God's a delusion, maybe heaven's a delusion, but don't knock people for wanting something more. I actually think, the atheist position is sort of that it's more optimistic and Christianity is all about hellfire and brimstone, but it could be argued that life after death, and that also applies to Buddhism, well, they have reincarnation, but that idea is very comforting to me. It might well be rubbish, it might be baseless rubbish, but what I have a problem with some atheists, and this is what I want to get at, and I really, really need to emphasize some, okay? I'm not talking about all atheists. So if you're an atheist and you're watching this, I'm not bashing atheists. I have no problem with people who don't believe in God, and I have no problem with people who argue why they don't believe in God. That's fine. So if you say, for example, I'm an atheist because there's no evidence, and you conduct your viewpoint in a civil manner, I have no problem with that. However, what I have seen in recent years, especially in the UK, where the church is actually, with a few exceptions, it is, I think, actually very tolerant. Now, there's the issue of women bishops. They're very intolerant in that regard. Although, actually, they've just enthroned the first woman bishop. There was one protester in the crowd of about 300 or 400, so that puts things in perspective. One thing I would say about Christianity, and I hope atheists do acknowledge this, certainly with Anglicanism, the church gets mocked all the time, and it's used in ways that many Christians probably see as inappropriate. What I mean by that is, for example, I came across a book saying the Bible of crystals. It was a book about the study of crystals in geology. Now, a lot of Christians might think it's inappropriate to use the term Bible in something that's got nothing to do with the Bible. I mean, to me, a Bible, I'm not a Christian, but I also think it's inappropriate. I think it's just like using a religious term for a commercial reason, basically. But you know what? The vast majority of Christians wouldn't care. They wouldn't conduct angry protests about that. And you see this all the time. Look at how many times Jesus, as a character, as a historical figure, is satirized. Take the life of Brian, for example. There's many examples. Now, in more religious countries, like the Philippines, you might see protests. But in countries like the UK, the protests are very minimal. The vast majority of Christians turn a blind eye to it and they rise above it. So that's one thing I hope that atheists do acknowledge, that the vast majority of Christians, certainly in Britain at least, might not be true in other more conservative societies, but at least in Britain, are not Bible-thumping extremists. And what I've noticed is there is a certain group of atheists, not all atheists, but there is a certain type of atheist who is very smug and very, I think they're somewhat hypocritical, because they say religious people try to impose their views on others, but then they go out of their way, writing books, doing interviews, making videos and so on, and they've every right to do so. I'm not saying they don't, but trying to convince people in their atheist argument. So my stance would be, well, what's the difference? You're criticising religious people for imposing their views, and certainly some of them do, but what is the difference between that and saying God's not real? You're an idiot if you believe that. And I do believe that there are some atheists who think that Islamists and Christian fundamentalists represent over 3 billion people. That's absurd. Religious people have a responsibility to denounce extremists within religion, and also to accept freedom of expression, and far too many, certainly within Islam, there is a problem with that. But what I have a problem with is this smugness and this arrogance that some atheists have. And I'm speaking here as an agnostic, not as a religious person. I have no problem with legitimate criticism of religion, or even of some religious people. What I do have a problem with is the smug attitude that some atheists take, that if you believe in God, you're an idiot. That might be their view, but I think it's a very demeaning and sort of insulting way to look at someone. If someone believes in God and they follow a religion, so long as they're not imposing it on you, it's none of your business, actually. So, for example, if a devout Catholic wants last rites the moment before they die, some atheists might think that's stupid. But I think it's rather cruel to say, well, this is something that gives that person comfort. Why should they be denied that? Now, it is true that we see far more evidence of religious extremism forcing itself on others, and that even includes some Western countries. The United States is a strong example. There's a hardcore element of the Christian right that does definitely have an influence in politics, and that is a problem. In a country like Britain, which is largely secular, what I am starting to notice is a lot more militant atheism. So, it's not a case that, and I'm well aware these militant atheists are not doing they're not beheading people, they're not attacking people, but there is a certain smugness that some of them go about in terms of their argument, and I do have a problem with it, because it's I think it's incredibly arrogant to suggest that just because you believe a certain way, you have intellectual superiority over every single religious person. There's religious people who have PhDs, who are university graduates, who have published dozens of books. The idea that they're all stupid and brainwashed sheep, I think, is a very demeaning sort of term. I've looked at theology, theological academic arguments, and it's not just a case of we believe in God, you must believe with us. These are comprehensively researched, and the point I'm trying to make here is that to demean religion as just being stupid, I think is a little bit lazy. You might believe it's stupid, but how do you explain that so many people staunchly believe there is something there? I mean, from my perspective, if you're a militant atheist, if you're going out of your way to argue about atheism, then you need to address that question. And it's no good just say, oh, well, they're all brainwashed. Then how do you explain the fact that you get devout religious people also in countries with high levels of education? So it's not just a case they're all from poor countries and, preachers brainwash them. I think that's a bit lazy. How do you explain devout religious people who are educated? I know a man, he's not my favourite person in the world, he's a little bit arrogant, but he's from a science background. He is from a science background. He's also a devout Christian and a preacher. Now, I don't particularly like him as a person. I think he's a bit arrogant, but the reason I'm pointing that out is the idea that, it's a case of, it's not that black and white. There are a lot of religious people who do come from academic backgrounds. Now, you might say it's academic fraud and they're frauding people, but all I'm saying is I find there's a certain attitude that some atheists have that just simplifies it all as, oh, well, they believe in a fairy tale god and they're all idiots. I just think that's a very lazy outlook to have. Maybe it's your opinion, but to dismiss millions and millions and millions of religious people as brainwashed idiots is very arrogant, but it has little basis in fact, actually. I guess what bothers me about this is, the usual atheist argument will be this, that, well, morality has nothing to do with having a religion or not. I agree with that. Any decent person should be able to tell the difference between right and wrong. So, of course, there are many, many decent atheists out there. I am not suggesting anything other than that. Being a decent person has nothing to do with having a religion, and many religious people have shit personalities. I agree. I completely agree with that argument that it's got nothing to do with that. But what some of atheists do is then try to suggest that only religious people are ignorant, only religious people have bad attitudes to humanity. I have seen this argument. I've seen the argument that religion, makes people ignorant and prejudiced and so on. And that might be true in some cases, but there's a certain smugness to that position because it is then elevating all atheists to a position of moral superiority. And I would like atheists to acknowledge that there are some atheists who also have a shit personality and who, now what they will say is, well, they're not doing those things in the name of atheism. Maybe not. But look at history, look at examples in history of persecution of religious people from staunchly atheist regimes. A prominent example is Mao's China, when Buddhist temples were vandalized and anything connected with religion was seen as the old ways. Look at the Mexican Revolution. Look at Stalin's Russia. There are many, many examples in history of religious people being persecuted because of religion, because they adhere to a certain religion. Now there's also contemporary examples of one religion persecuting another. We see it all the time in the likes of Pakistan. But I'm just tired of the atheist argument that atheism is, like, if you're an atheist, you're a good person. That's just as arrogant as religious people saying that if you're religious, you will be saved. So what I'm getting at here is, I have no problem with atheists making arguments based on facts and criticising religion. I think religion should be criticised, that's fine. What I have a problem with is some atheists who are just as dogmatic and just as arrogant as the religious hardliners they are opposing. Now, it's different if they're campaigning for people in a country, a theocracy, where severe human rights abuses take place. But what I don't get is why they target religious people in a country where there is largely secular democracy, such as Britain. So, yeah. Again, I am emphasising I'm not talking about all religious people. All I'm saying is that just because you're an atheist doesn't mean that you're intellectually superior to a religious person. You might think you are, but there's absolutely no evidence to suggest that, you know, I don't know. I'm just, I get a little bit frustrated with this because I know a lot of decent religious people, and I feel some atheists sort of generalise them all, and it does bother me a little bit. Okay, thanks for watching.